Hi, welcome to Portal to the New Earth. I'm Harlan Emil Gruber, and I'm here with my good friend and mentor, James Wines of SITE. He was the head of the Department of Environmental Design while I was studying at Parsons School of Design in the early 80s. And they chose him as the head because he led this incredible architectural art firm called SITE, Sculpture in the Environment, where they were having great success in using architecture as their canvas for making social commentary and really interesting buildings at the time. And if you want to learn all about this, James is included in this upcoming show in 2023 at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. And to that end, they are also instigating an environmental architecture program there. And James's work has been featured in an incredible video, so you can get a whole overview of what he's about by watching that. The link is in the information below, and also we'll try to link it at the end of this video. So James, thanks for joining me today. Really excited to hear about everything you've been doing.
Delighted to be here. We've known each other for a long time. I really admire your direction because we are in a situation now where individuals can do a great deal just by carrying the message of looking at the environment in a new way and finding salvation for humanity through either spiritual or intellectual or whatever creative means we have at our disposal.
So James's work is featured in my book, Portal to the New Earth, which is just coming out right now. And of course, he has so many incredible projects, but the ones that kind of overlay with my vision of creating this new Earth, one of his most famous pieces is called the Highrise of Homes, which we'll be going into detail later in this talk, which is just this huge skyscraper structure that's then infilled with basically your suburban sprawl. So it's a 3D complexity miniaturization of that. And then much later on, he came up with this other incredible 3D vertical landscape, which we'll be getting to. But, James is going to share with us what his main focus is, which he's been illustrating recently too, which we'll get to see, is nature's revenge. So James, if you want to dive into that presentation.
Well, I can. I recently gave a program at Harvard, and it was called Nature's Revenge. And whereas that sounds negative, it really isn't. But I was really using nature's revenge, which is a fact of the world these days. I was using it as a kind of a cornerstone to talk about reductive thinking and doing things simpler and better and with less impact on the environment. So that was the thrust of the program. Okay, so as I say, this was a lecture at the GSD. The general title was Nature's Revenge, but it really is trying to do more with less. And I think that that's the future because the revenge is here. And every day and all across the country, we're experiencing the collapse of weather conditions and changes and so forth. So the guidelines, I guess, for my whole programs recently have been forcing yourself to use restricted means as a sort of restraint that liberates invention. It obliges you to make the kind of progress you can't even imagine in advance. And that's a quote from Picasso I like. But what we do is we live in a rich world, poor world situation, which is tragic. Every city in the world has begun to look alike. It's all based on the same paradigm. And the actual facts, if we believe the Oxfam report, in Switzerland, 1/6 of the world's fresh water supply, 1/4 of its wood harvest, and 2/5 of its fossil fuels and manufactured materials go into the construction of human shelter. And at the same time, billionaires have more wealth than 4.6 billion people who make up 60% of the planet's population. Anyway, the world, the way it's being designed because of computers, the access to infinite opportunities to make any shape you want. Well, every shape is not art. Every shape is not practical or functional. And actually, it's a kind of overkill based on technology, a gee whiz point of view. And it's also left the world with a lot of bleak spaces. I think boring cityscapes increase sadness, addiction, and disease-related stress. Is urban design a matter of public health? So the CAD world is now designing endless buildings that couldn't be done before because we didn't have the technology and the resources to do it. But this is not doing any good for the environment. This kind of structures are almost ecological in their nature. And the one thing that always bothers me about this is that all the forms and ideas come from sculpture from about 1910, industrial form or organic form. And these forms have dominated everything. I mean, if we go back one, you can see that we're using the most advanced technology to make 100-year-old shapes and volumes and forms. So that's questionable. I mean, the real world looks like this. If we're going to be influenced by the iconography of the world, it's going to look like this: ecology and information. And so at site, we ask ourselves a lot, what, if anything, do we do right? Well, one thing I think you can do is just look at how you think, how you do it. I mean, I do hand drawings, for example. In fact, no one does hand drawings anymore. And that's my point, because mind to hand is, among the other things, is that the advantage is you make subliminal accidents. And there's those arbitrary, unpredictable graphic markings. You just got to dribble off your drawing tools that provide a source of new ideas inspired by the unforeseen residuals of chance. And that's one thing a computer and AI or none of them can do. We have been always involved with environmental information, and some of the earlier things I showed you, whether with or without vegetation and connections directly, we did always give that consideration. That was something from the first outset of site in 1970. But by the 80s, we were really invested in it heavily. And I wrote a book called Green Architecture for Tashin. And actually it became one of their best-selling books. And they did a hardcover version as well, which is very rare in that company. This was the center of the Seville World Expo. And it was really almost a half a kilometer long. And it was created in the plan and the shape of the Guadalquivir River, where Columbus, of course, built his ships to discover America. So it was sort of the centerpiece of Seville. And it was all water on one side and all vegetation on the other. And then they wove back and forth together as well. And as you know, since it had to be ready in time, we grew all of the foliage, the roof foliage, about 2 years in advance, and then planted it. And then the irrigation system actually gave a power source to run the waterfalls on the glass. So it was kind of compressing energy sources and growing. Another thing we did, we had seeded earth inside of columns. And this is the way they started when they were constructing them. And this is the way it looked when it filled out. So if you went from outside in a hot Seville summer, and it does get very hot there, to inside, the temperature dropped about 25 degrees. So all of the restaurants and exhibitions and everything were in the shade, natural vegetation. And it also is people pockets. I mean, the fact that public spaces don't really think about people sitting and talking, touching water, enjoying their family life. So these were all built into the project, so you could really enjoy it. And then, of course, there was a lot of vegetation. I mean, you're under a canopy and surrounded by trees, and plus the water wall. So you asked me to talk about one project, which is actually our most popular project. We get more requests for images showing this whole process. But it was based on the fact that, during the Robert Moses days, all these ghastly buildings were built in New York when people had no identity. And this is a way of achieving individual identity in the cityscape. So the architect only built the matrix and the core structure, elevators and so forth. And the parcels, you could buy a parcel and you could insert whatever you want, any kind of building you wanted. And it was buildings based on the old Sears and Roebuck 1920s system. Where they just sold catalog houses. You could order all the parts, and we made a whole system of how we could make these and order them. So it's exactly the old Sears Roebuck idea manifested in a building. And you could certainly see in a typical skyscraper landscape, this would bring people's identity, the individual dweller's identity into the world. So it's a form of communication, a way of adding vegetation, and it had many, many values. And it's been often imitated. I would say this is never built. We almost had a chance in Japan, but the proprietor of that real estate, the owner of the real estate, I think went bankrupt during the crash in the 80s, so we didn't have a chance. But anyway, it has had a huge influence. As you can see, there are buildings sort of based on the Highrise homes all over the world. There's so many manifestations now that came after it. I think the Highrise of Homes was, 1981. So this is all since 1981. There's this proliferation of examples of the building. But they all make the same mistake. They're all called homes in the sky. But they're homes in the sky, like the one on the left here, where everything is designed. The customer, the urban dweller, the occupant, whatever, does not decide on their own destiny. They do not decide on their garden. They don't decide on their facade or whatever. Whereas the Highrise of Homes was the polar opposite. We have a whole history of reevaluating the city, which sadly we never lose, where you put the pedestrians and on one level, you put the fast transit on another level, it's a slow transit. So you have a terraced city, you have a layered city. Harvey Wilder Corbett is one of the pioneers of this, but it had a huge influence. There were many, many other opportunities along these lines of building larger structures, but in a much more practical and thoughtful way than has been done. And this is not the way, I don't think. I think it's one way if you want to do it. If you're in love with your computer and you're obsessed with shapes, this is one way to go. There are all sorts of innovative ways. This is a small hotel resort by WH Studio in China, where it's built on a hillside, but it's almost clustered like a village.
You touched on the Highrise of Homes, and that is clearly your most famous piece. I remember for a long time, you actually had it hanging in the Museum of Modern Art in their architecture section. It was on permanent display for many years. And like you say, a lot of people ask you about it, and I include it in my book. And, that's one of the most interesting things about it that you do at some points go into detail is that the structure itself would be an entire community center. You would have like your stores and other community services all integrated into it. And then, like you say, people can build their own homes. And so, I don't know if you just want to go into a little bit more detail or your thoughts behind that. And, and also this is one of the things that's very interesting. Tiny homes have become so popular right now. And this is like an ideal kind of infrastructure for people to be able to bring their tiny homes to and plug in and live for as long as they would like to. And if when they want to move to another, maybe there'll be multiple ones of these all over for people to easily come and go. So yeah, I'd like to hear any other thoughts you've had about this project of yours.
Well, I mean, it obviously rang a bell because it has been exhibited. In fact, it's been, I think, had shows over 100 times, more than 100. I have a whole list somewhere, but it's been shown a lot. It was shown for the reopening of MoMA. It was in that show as well. So it is a popular image and charismatic, I think. And I do think it brings up a fundamental problem, which I've talked about throughout the presentation today, is that human identity, people's own personalities, their own selections, their own thoughts, their own ideas, have to come out in the public domain. That has to be part of the future. Because if you deny it, if an architect overplans your world, it's like a form of fascism. That's all it is. It's just telling you this is how you have to live. This is what you're supposed to like. So in a sense, you have no choice. So we always said that the Highrise of Homes was about choice, chance, and change. And those are the three elements. And the other example I was showing you what it's not about is exactly that. And there are so many kind of spin-off type buildings, as I was showing you, that always call themselves homes in the sky. I guess they don't dare call it Highrise of Homes because it's already there, but they always call it homes in the sky. And they advertise that way. It's like, because the building is broken up, it makes it seem more animated or something. But the animations are not by the residents. The animations are by the architect. So go figure. What, you know, it's one of those ideas. I guess it'll stay there, and maybe somebody will really do it and say, okay, let's give it a try, I hope.
I do think something along those lines would make sense. And then I also include in my book that really fantastic project called the Vertiscape. I think Antilia Vertiscape. Yeah. And so, you know, I'd like to have you describe that a little bit more in detail because it really is an interesting vision of multi-level, ecologically integrated space.
I was in an area up on a hill in Mumbai in India, where there was a little vegetation, not much, and they were going to build a tower. I said, well, wouldn't it be interesting to make like a Central Park situation in the sky? And since they were a Hindu family and apparently quite religious, we decided to, you know, take the layers of life in Hindu life, you know, vegetation and water. And when you get to the top, that's the brain, of course, and that's enlightenment. So we designed the whole building around that theme. That is a kind of Hindu ascendancy as you go towards heaven in a way. And that was the idea. But each floor, you had a profusion of vegetation or water or food. And one was a kind of dining floor. So, but the project is, again, one of those ones that's reproduced a lot. And people look at it. I think the most innovative aspect of it, for building towers, is I had this idea for a long time that why don't you build such a hugely expensive and difficult thing to do to actually build vertically? Why don't you drop cables to make a central structure, the elevator cord, build a huge truss at the top, drop cables to the ground, then build each floor on the ground where it's easy to do, and you just bring it up by cables. You just have a crane up near the top, and you stick the crane, you pull the floor up with cables, and then lock it in place. So you could build the floors of the building, a vertical building, with less energy and less time and so forth.
It's like the three-dimensionalization of an urban space, but making it very organic and like livable spaces. So that's why I included it, because of just by looking at that image, you really get a sense of something like that possible. And like you say, using the tension cables in it, in the structure. So it's really quite a departure from conventional high-rise buildings.
Oh yeah, but also the main idea was to be more integrative with the community. I mean, all the lower floors are basically for the community, and they can enjoy nature and water and have a nice lunch and do whatever they want to have children playing. Whereas the family are at the top anyway, they're elevated and they're independent of the even though they're part of it. So they're part of the neighborhood, but they're independent as well. So
Right. All right.
anyway, that was the idea.
Well, great. And then I really would like to share some of the latest work that you were just showing me, which is along the title of your presentation, Nature's Revenge, where, you have these beautiful images of urban landscapes that are now completely been consumed by nature itself. And I think that's a big part of, the conversation right now in architecture is this, relationship between, this very austere built environment, man-made environment, and the way nature operates. And
Yeah.
In your vision, it's like completely nature is taking back over. In the vision I'm holding, we need to maybe fend off nature, but then bring it in consciously, that we allow nature to integrate rather than to revenge. So that's kind of like the conversation I'd like to have about these images with you, but definitely we'll be sharing them here so for you to comment on them. And it's a great way to think about the relationship of building and nature.
Well, you're absolutely right, because everything we've ever done really has been about something that's already in that context. It's either social or psychological or topographical or uh, ecological. It's something already there. And you just kind of pull it into the building so the building looks like it was always there. That's sort of the idea.
Right. And it's interesting to think though that as humanity is at this brink of all of these um, relationship to nature, and like it's detrimental relationship to nature, that nature is going to get its revenge because of the way we've treated it. And it's just a great concept that you've kind of embodied and made visual.
Well, and it's kind of interesting that I listened to Glenn Small, and Glenn Small does think on a big scale. Obviously, he's really interested in mega cities and the possibilities. The only issue that I'd say is that is the probability factor. The fact that getting money assembled to build something like that, they'll do it for a shopping center, but they rarely would do it for real habitat. And so he's fighting who's going to do this and what kind of government. I mean, Saudi Arabia is building this, I don't know, linear city to the desert, but I think it's mostly commercial enterprises of some kind. And again, that's not the only way. I really believe in diversity in the fullest sense, not just racial, which is a kind of concentrated on now. Everything is sort of the minute you say diversity, people think of oppressed civilization. So it's not that. It's really liberating and inventing with this huge variety of options that we have at our disposal. I mean, we really do. And people survive very, very well before the world of technology took over. And technology, as I say, I use the tools. We're using the tool right now. But that's not the only tool. The human brain is the most complex and most flexible tool of all. And they even say about AI now, and I'm trying to bring it into, I'm doing some lectures on drawing, and they're saying, well, it's like all computer things. It's all based on existing structures and systems. So whatever is fed into there already exists and has already been worked out and the computer expert, the programmer, just applies it. So you're always being limited by that fact. The guy is breathing down your neck. And that's not as flexible as the brain wants to be. It just isn't.
Yep, I know. And I think that's the bottom line. And that's, kind of what I address is that it's the way we think about the world. It's the choices we make because of how we perceive. And, the fact that we are in a very advanced technological age, in my vision, I see us being able to go in a much more simple, organic, analog way, just like the beauty of the way you do your drawings without technology. I really feel, even though the technology is a really useful tool to build things that weren't possible before, there's also a lot to be said about just the natural hands-on approach to things to make our environments, the most beautiful that we can. And it's finding the balance now at this point.
That's right. Absolutely right. No, this is we've touched on some important things today. But I do think that and we're both obviously limited. We do not have billionaires as patrons to make anything, no matter how fantastic, possible.
Who knows? Maybe that'll change.
I think that our inventions are more modest, but that what it does, it encourages more people to be more inventive. This idea of just complaining, I mean, I always tell minority groups and special interest groups and woke groups and whatever, I always tell them, don't be so narrow in your thinking. It just isn't work that way. You have to be flexible. There have to be all kinds of options that you consider. And this idea of always complaining, oh, well, these 200 years ago, they suppressed my race, or they suppressed my people, or we, suffered a famine, or whatever. And so you can't mount creativity only on complaints. It has to be, you sort of forget the complaints and focus on the results, or focus on the options, or focus on the solutions. So the solutions are always in the back of your mind. I always say that, we worked for both Willie Smith in the 80s and then recently Virgil Abloh. And sadly, both of these kind of fashion design geniuses died early. Willie Smith died of AIDS at I think, 39, and Virgil Abloh died of a heart problem at 40. So we lost two of our biggest clients, really, our most loyal clients. And the one thing I always have to say about them, I never heard them. I know they certainly had their complaints about being, condemned by all the insults and inequities and being a part of a Black culture, but they didn't talk about it. Neither one of them I ever heard make a complaint. It was always just get on with it. Let's see what we can do. What's the most creative approach? Everything was about their work, about their creativity, about optimism. And I thought, well, when you deal with people like that, which I have a lot in my life all over the world, you never think about the opposite. It doesn't become an impediment to thinking, or it doesn't become an impediment to creativity. I do think mental negativity is like a disease. People like it because you can always get sympathy. All you have to do is make a cry for your troubles, and then you'll find an audience. And then you can identify with the sad part and never reach the good part. That's what's one of the problems. So I think there has to be a big debate on positive thinking and what goes into it and how people can make that transformation. And when every creative person I've known has made that transformation. And rarely, we all discuss, the stupidity of politicians was a given. But I think that, identifying too fully with oppression or anything negative really stands in the way of that creative activity. It really does. It thwarts it and it limits it. So I think there should be a big debate. That's one of your big debates for your portals is where can we go? I mean, how can we only consider optimistic themes and ideas?
Yep, absolutely. I think that was a good way to wrap up our talk. We've got to keep being positive and optimistic. And you've had great success throughout your career in a world that was, kind of stacked against your approach, and yet you persevered and, reached your level of success. And so thank you so much for taking the time today. And remember to hit like and share this video with people you think would like to see it, and subscribe to the channel. And
Okay.
we'll see you on the next Portal to the New Earth.
Okay, thanks a lot. It was a lot of fun.